Starting a business is hard enough, and if you're in a well-paid, safe job, taking the decision to leave all that behind can be pretty tough. So what happens if you take the plunge, you make that leap, you start laying down the groundwork to get your clients, and then a global pandemic comes along and all the work dries up? What do you do then? That's what we talk about in this interview. I'm Jeremy Klein, and this is Change Work Life. Hello and welcome to Change Work Life, where we're all about beating the Sunday evening blues and enjoying Mondays again. Now, in most careers, continuing education or continuing professional development, it's a fact of life. You've got to stay on top of current developments in your area, but frankly, it's often all a bit of a chore. Well, my guest this week is looking to change all that. Erin Gallimore leads continuing education workshops in the water and wastewater space, and she's also a leadership coach to professional engineers and land surveyors. Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jeremy.
So can you start by telling us a bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I think that some of the titles I've heard are a teacher, a consultant, a coach. And really what I like to focus on is communication between people at work, communication with yourself, how to better become more effective, more efficient, more productive in the workplace. And so that's really my focus, whether I'm working one-on-one in corporate or whether I'm working with teams or teaching some of my continuing education classes. And so that's really my focus, is all about communication and leading oneself.
I've got to ask, how did you end up working in water and wastewater? I mean, it doesn't sound on the faces of it like the most glamorous of industries.
Oh, come on. It's totally glamorous.
I'm sure it's very interesting. I'm sure it's absolutely fascinating.
Oh, goodness.
That's not the first word that comes to mind.
No. Usually people try to run away from me once I tell them that I was once a wastewater engineer, but it's really quite fascinating. I was a school teacher for a number of years right out of college, and I decided to go back to pursue my master's in engineering. And I knew I wanted to do a thesis project of some sort. And the first professor that I ran into at North Carolina State University was Joel Ducoste, who is one of the professors in the wastewater department. And we just started talking, and he mentioned some projects that he was working on, and I just kind of jumped all in. And that really is what started my fascination with water and wastewater and working in that field.
How did you end up teaching, and why did you leave that?
Well, I've always taught, even when I was in high school, when I was in college, I always found ways to tutor other students, ways to get in front of folks and teach. I just love trying to break down a big concept into bite-sized pieces and be able to share it with other people and to teach. I don't know. It's just, I've always been a natural teacher. I've just loved helping other people to figure things out, turning on the light bulb for others. And, I was a school teacher, a middle school teacher, actually, in science, teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th graders for a number of years. And while I loved it, I just felt like there was something more that I wanted in my life and in my career. So that's really the reason I went back to school, knowing that one day I could return to teaching. But for right now, I just needed to figure out what that something more was. And so that's really why I left teaching.
So going back to wastewater, I mean, lots of industries have a requirement for continuing education or CPD of some description. What was it like in your industry? I mean, what were the requirements? Was it sort of annual refreshers more regularly than that? What was expected of you?
Right. So it depends. So I have my professional engineering license and also my wastewater operator license. So the regulations and requirements, annual requirements for each are different. But the common theme among both of them was boring. It was just torture to have to pursue those continuing education classes every year, and so after sitting through them myself for years and years and years, I just knew there had to be a different way to do this. How can we teach these classes and bring people quality information that they can actually use in their day-to-day lives and break it down? Like I was mentioning earlier with teaching, how do we break a concept down into something that people can actually take with them and use today, not just these big picture ideas? And so that's why I started focusing on communications and leadership in my continuing education classes for professional engineers and also for water and wastewater operators, because that's not really a topic that's taught. It's not a focus area. People tend to think that's, fluff, and it's not. It's important. I mean, if there's one thing that you're doing every day at work is communicating. And so it's really important. And so I wanted to bring that to the continuing education space because it definitely didn't exist in a format that was impactful in the past.
So is your focus more on the leadership and communication, or do you also do sort of the if you like, the technical continuing education? So, the stuff that's a hot topic that they need to know.
Right. So my focus is certainly on the communications and leadership within the workplace, no matter whether it's you're an operator at a water or wastewater plant, or if you're a professional engineer, or really any type of professional career. Communications and leadership are very important concepts that they're important to learn more about. But I also do technical. I was an engineer, and so I love math. And so I've taught a number of math classes with a technical spin on them for a number of water and wastewater operator schools, because, in order to get your operator certification, you have to go to school. You have to go to a school to get certified. And so I teach at those. And there's a number of other technical classes that I've taught in the past. But my focus is certainly on communications and leadership because that's what I have a passion for.
So you mentioned how continuing education was quite dull. Can you talk me a bit through where you saw the opportunities?
Oh, goodness. So, well, engineers are known for not being very good communicators. And so I definitely saw quite a lot of opportunities there to help. And because, there's a personality type, and I'm completely stereotyping here, Jeremy, but there's a personality type that comes with being an engineer, usually someone who's much more reserved, someone much more introverted. And so communication skills are typically not something that are focused on in school, and certainly not something that is taught. In school, you learn a lot of technical information. You don't learn how to work in a team. You don't learn how to best communicate and advocate for yourself. You don't learn how to step up and lead and negotiate or deal with conflict. And so those are some of the areas that I focus in, because everyone can benefit from learning more and diving into those difficult topics, because we all confront those difficult spots, no matter, actually, it doesn't really matter whether it's water, wastewater, or engineering. This is, industry-wide, people-wide, everyone can benefit from learning a little bit more about communication and learning a little bit more about how to strategically apply some tips and tricks to better communicate more effectively and efficiently in the workplace.
So when you're approached, are you approached by the individuals who are looking to skill up themselves, or is this industry who's actually recognizing a gap in the skill set of their employees?
Both, usually. I've been approached by a number of engineering firms who have asked me to put together leadership programs, especially for their newer managers, because those are typically folks that are struggling because they've become excellent in their role as an engineer, and now they're stepping into a management position where they're going to need to lead others, lead projects, and they don't have the skill set they need. And so I've been asked by a number of firms to put together those leadership packages for them, maybe a 6-month program, maybe a year-long program, where I go in and, I teach classes, but also provide them with one-on-one coaching and help them, learn the skills that they need to basically set them up for success, give them what they need to succeed. But then I've also worked with folks one-on-one as well, who've just realized, Erin, I just don't have what I need to succeed. I don't know what to do in these situations. I just kind of feel paralyzed in this new role that I have. And they, come to me and work with me one-on-one to get where they want to be, so that they feel like they have what it takes to continue to succeed on their career path.
So aside from recognizing that there was this gap, what motivated you to stop being a wastewater engineer and all that good stuff, and to start doing this sort of thing?
Yeah, I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. I've always wanted to own my own company and really just figure out how I can use the skills, use the experience, use the things that I've been through to help others. And that's what made me decide to start my own company. I wanted to focus only on the coaching and the consulting and the teaching. And I love engineering and I love the projects and the challenges that came along with that, but I love the people part more. And so that's what made me decide to start my own company and really focus on the people part of the professional world and see what impact I could make.
So how much did the consulting, coaching and teaching part form what you were doing before you set up your own business?
I don't know how to answer that.
Well, in your role before you set up your own business, did you have opportunity as an engineer yourself to do the coaching, the consulting, and the teaching?
Okay. Yeah. So I spent 10 years as an engineer. And throughout that time, I was asked to provide continuing education classes for other engineers and for operators during that time. And I focused on a number of technical topics because, being an engineer, you focus on technical pieces, but then I was also given the opportunity to focus on leadership, to focus on communication. And so that is where I loved the back and forth. I loved, talking through these concepts with people, taking these big ideas of leadership and communication and breaking it down into bite-sized pieces that they could actually take with them and use that day rather than these big picture abstract ideas where you're like, that sounds great, but I have no idea how to implement it. And, those opportunities to teach in those classes, it was so great. I just really enjoyed them. And then, of course, also working with my own teams that I managed, and being able to work with my staff, it was just a great opportunity to, take these newer engineers who had just come out of school and help them succeed, help set them up for success, to give them what they need. Because, you aren't taught communications, and how to talk to people, how to work in a team when you're in school. And so, yeah, I had lots of opportunities to do the things that I do now when I was an engineer. And that's what helped me to decide that, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to be full time, not just part of the time.
Can you talk a bit more about how the opportunity arose to do the leadership coaching when you were still working in industry? So I can understand how people might come up to you and say, Erin, we've got this technical topic. We need someone to deliver the training. We know you'll be good at it. Can you do that? But how does that then become, Erin, we need someone to teach leadership skills?
Yeah. So while I was an engineer, I had a number of other engineers, at other firms, other companies come up to me and say, hey, Erin, I need help. I see where you are, you're able to talk in front of groups, you're able to give these presentations with confidence, with ease, and lead these teams and deal with these difficult situations with clients and with even inside your own company. I need to figure out how to do that. I want to step into those shoes. I want to be able to, do the things that you do. And so it really was more of an organic experience where I had some folks, recognizing that I was able to do things that they were struggling with. And by the way, Jeremy, I struggled with them too. It's just, I must have looked more confident in my struggles because everyone struggles with those things. That's really how it happened. Folks started coming up to me and I started working with them one-on-one, on the side while I was an engineer, just helping other people to step into their own skills and help to reinforce those skills that they needed to be successful.
This is fascinating because one of the subjects that comes up quite a lot in the podcast is how if you're struggling with something, then you find someone who already does what you're trying to do. And, you ask them whether they can mentor you or whatever. So that we've had a few people who have been through that process of finding the mentor. In your case, it sounds like you were the mentor. People saw that you could do what they wanted to do and they were seeking out you. Right.
It was very humbling. It's not, it wasn't something that I had anticipated or even thought would happen. It just started happening. And it was an amazing experience being on that side because I certainly struggled for years and years and years myself.
You mentioned how you kind of had these entrepreneurial tendencies and this desire to start your own company. Where did all that come from? Where was this motivation coming from?
Gosh, I don't know. I think it was just from, being a kid and trying to figure out how to go around the neighborhood and sell soda. So I had some extra spending money, when I was a little girl. And, I started working, when I was very young, and just having that independence and earning my own money and being able to, pursue the things I wanted to pursue, and I also ran for student council and did a lot of leadership type things when I was in school, from elementary to middle to high school. And I just really enjoyed getting up and leading, and working with a group and bringing people together for a common cause in order to achieve a goal and make impact. And so I just knew that one day I wanted to do that for myself. And I guess that's where it started. I don't know. I've never quite figured out, where it all came from, but that was probably a cumulative effect, if you will.
Okay, so from these beginnings, and then you go to work in corporate, and maybe you've got this in the back of your mind, but when you're starting to think seriously about setting your own company up and setting up your own business, what were you looking for that your position wasn't providing?
Independence, autonomy, being able to make my own decisions, not having to deal with the red tape, asking for what I needed and it falling on deaf ears. I was ready to make the decisions. I was ready to make things happen. And I knew I could, and I had confidence in myself. And it was just time. I was frustrated, and I didn't want to continue to go to work every day being frustrated. And I knew there was something more that I could do and achieve. And so that's really, over time, I guess what they call it, the itch. I had the itch. I'm like, I just know that I can do something more. I can do something better. I can do this myself. And so it was just dealing with that and kind of turning it over in my head for a number of years, trying to figure out, well, what does it look like and how do I do this? And, oh my gosh, this is scary because there's no longer going to be a salary. But, after, struggling with it for years and realizing, life is short. And so I just had to kind of take the plunge, and I did.
Can you point to any particular moment that that took you from this sounds interesting, but I'm too scared to no, I'm going to do this?
I think I had moved around within engineering, within a number of consulting positions a number of times. Each time moving, I was stepping up in leadership. I was stepping up in responsibility. And as I continued to step up, I just still wasn't feeling fulfilled. I thought, this will be it. This will be the challenge that I seek. This will give me, this will make me feel like I am making a contribution. I am making a difference. I am doing the things that I was meant to do. And each time I took that next step, while the beginning, the first few weeks, the first few months were exciting, and it was something different, it was something new, and I felt good about this new challenge, it wasn't it. It wasn't giving me what I felt I needed. And this is a hard question to answer. I think it is for a lot of entrepreneurs. You just have this need. You just have this want for something more, but it's hard to actually describe it or put words to it. And so after that happened, it's time and again, I decided, now is the time. Now is the time. I've got to go ahead and do this, because if I fail, if I don't succeed, if this doesn't end up being what I want it to be, starting my own business, that is, then I still am young enough and experienced enough to go back. And so that's really, and my husband was secure in his job. And so I was like, this is the time. I don't want to wait until I'm 50 or 60 years old to say, okay, now I'm ready. I wanted to do it while I was young, because I don't know, that's kind of where I was, mentally at the time.
Was there a period between you deciding that you were going to start your own business and you quitting your previous job? So did you have a period where you were sort of plotting and planning all this, but whilst you were still employed?
Oh, yes. There was a crossover of about a year. And I was working hard during the day and in the evening and during lunch breaks and on weekends. I was trying to figure out, how in the world do you start your own business from nothing? I knew that I didn't want to join with another company. I wanted to do it myself. Maybe that was foolish looking back, but that's what I had decided at the time that I wanted to do. And so there was about a year there where I was just trying to figure out, Erin, who are you? How are you going to show up? What does your own company look like? Because in the communications and leadership, coaching or consulting space, it's huge. There's so many options. There's so many things you could do. And I knew I needed to niche down a bit and figure out, well, where do I fit? Where will I be successful? Where do I want to focus? And so there was a lot of time spent on just trying to figure out, what does that look like? And where do I go? And how do I start? And who do I talk to? And how do I pay for all of this? And how much do I save? And, just all the things that come along with trying to figure out, how am I going to leave this cozy salary job and move to a position where nothing is guaranteed? And it was very, very exciting and very, very overwhelming at the same time. But the answer to your question, long answer, about a year is what I spent trying to figure out what it all looked like before I completely jumped.
And how did you figure all that out? Because you've just described to me this sort of massive questions, which I can imagine going round and round your head like a washing machine. How did you start to pick out the strands and make sense of it all to conclude what you did want to do?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I've actually come to a conclusion quite yet. It's still in process. I really just started at the beginning with what I wanted. What do I want? What do I want every day to look like? How much do I want to work? Who do I want to work with? What does that look like? And I started from there. And then I started talking to people, about this opportunity. Does this sound like something that makes sense for me? Because for me, at least, when I talk through my ideas with other people, sometimes I recognize and realize things that I didn't know before. Because, it's one thing when you sit in silence and think, and it's another thing when you start talking through your ideas and what you're thinking about with other people that you know and love and trust. And so I just started talking it through. And of course, I was reading a ton of books about starting businesses and, what do you do and how do you do things and what does it look like and all the things. But honestly, I'm still just figuring it out. And I think a lot of that has to do with, the pandemic. I spent my first year in business and this would be one piece of advice I would give for anyone trying to start a business is recognize that first year is just going to be, assume you're not going to make any money. You probably will make some, but just assume you're not, because really that first year is for you to start to build relationships, because everything in this world is built on relationships. And so that's really your year to start putting your feelers out there for your business and develop relationships with people, and figure out who you are and how you want to show up and what do things look like, and kind of laying the foundation, laying the groundwork for your business. Because if you're in that first year and you're hungry to make money and that's your sole focus, you're probably going to get really frustrated, because it's so important to lay that foundation first. And so that would be one piece of advice I wish I could have given myself if I could go back in time. I think I lost track of the question originally, Jeremy. What was I trying to answer?
No, that's absolutely fine. That's great stuff and really helpful. When you mentioned having conversations with people, how did you choose who you have those conversations with? Or perhaps to put it another way, who were the people who gave you the most useful input on those conversations? Because, if you're thinking about starting a business, you might talk to everyone. You'll probably talk to your family, you'll talk to your friends, you may or may not talk to work colleagues, depending on what your situation is. But, going and telling your mum that you're going to start a business, I mean, she might be, yeah, you go, sounds great, without necessarily having a clue what's involved, whereas other people are going to provide much more practical advice. So where did you find the really useful advice came from in those conversations you had?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, because the reactions that I ended up getting from people were a surprise to me. So, and I've heard what I'm getting ready to say from a number of other entrepreneurs. So I think this is also a good piece of advice for folks, is to recognize that, the people that I care and love the most, my family, they weren't initially supportive. The responses I got from them were, well, why would you leave this career that you've built in engineering for 10 years? Look at how much schooling you had to go through. Look at where you started and where you are now. Look at the salary that you have. Look at the security that you have. You have a young family, Erin, and that was the response that I got from the majority of my family and friends. I was all excited when I went to them to say, hey, I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to do this. I love this. This is my passion. This is where I feel like I can make an impact in the world. And they kind of looked at me like I was growing another head. It was like, are you crazy? I mean, I actually got that response from other folks that, are you crazy? And that was really, really disheartening. I have to tell you, Jeremy, that was a struggle, because I was excited and had a plan, but the people that meant the most to me in this world weren't supportive of it.
What did you do with those reactions? I mean, did you just kind of acknowledge them and ignore them? Did you try and explain to these people, well, yeah, okay, sunk cost fallacy, it's not working out for me, I need to make a change? Or what did you do? Did you sort of engage, or did you just kind of go, okay, well, they're entitled to their opinion?
Yeah. So my response to all of them was just kind of, okay, that's the way you feel. And I kind of had to brush it aside because I had already made my decision. It wasn't I'm seeking your permission to do this. It was, I've made this decision. I am an adult and here I go. I hope you will support me. What do you think? And so I'd already made my decision at that point. And so I really just had to brush their opinions and their thoughts aside, even though it was hurtful, and just keep going. And what was surprising is the people, strangers, other entrepreneurs were the ones who were most supportive of me, all excited for me, completely thrilled that I was making this jump and making this decision. And that's what was so surprising to me. I thought that it would be the other way around. And so I just had to keep going, even though I didn't have the support of family and friends that I wanted to have.
I completely understand that, but it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that the reactions would be that way around. And I think that's just because, entrepreneurs know what it's like. They understand the itch, which you described earlier, whereas friends and family certainly have your best interest at heart, but maybe, it's a slightly more traditional way of thinking, I suppose. But you've had all this education and you've got all this experience, and why would you throw it away? So you mentioned the pandemic. Just to set it in context, so we're recording this in May 2021. And how long has your business been going so far? So
the pandemic, it started worldwide, really, the impact hit back in March, well, at least in the United States. The impact hit back in March of 2020.
When was your business started?
My business started in January of 2019.
Okay.
So 1 year in, now we're in March of 2020, and the pandemic, that's when it really started to affect the United States and businesses shutting down and things. And at that point, I had a number of corporate contracts in the works. Remember how I said earlier, it takes a year to really build that foundation, establish those relationships, get in front of people. And so then the beginning of 2020, that's when all of those, relationships had started to come to fruition for me, where I had contracts that were being negotiated for 6-month, year-long contracts in corporate America that were going to support me and my family for the rest of the year, right? In my business. And I lost those contracts, because businesses had to make the decision of, do we bring in this, consultant who is going to help our people with communications and leadership and help to give them what they need to succeed in this capacity? Or do we make sure that we actually have the money to pay their salaries? And of course, they had to choose, have the money to pay their salaries. No one knew what the impact of this pandemic was going to be. And so everyone, that I had, contracts pending with responded in a more conservative way, understandably. And so I'm sitting, at my house in April of 2020, having lost, at least tentatively, not knowing how long it was going to be, the contracts I had been working on for a year, and looking at almost no income for the year of 2020, at least not, in backlog at all. And so I kind of had to look at, how am I going to pivot? What am I going to do? How are we going to make the best of this situation that we're in? And that's where I really started to increase my efforts in teaching continuing education classes for professional engineers and for water and wastewater operators, because I had been doing that, but just a little bit here and there. So I really started to increase that effort, because regardless of the pandemic, people still had to, get those contact hours, those professional development hours for the year. And so that's where I pivoted for the year 2020.
And that's great that you had that skill that you could still fall back on. I mean, maybe it wasn't the thing that you were really passionate about in your business, but you had kind of laid the groundwork setting up that you were going to offer that as well anyway. So that's tremendous foresight, or possibly very good luck, one of the two.
It was just luck. It was luck.
So is that something that you've managed to keep going then, and it has basically filled in at least some of the gap that you experienced from the start of 2020?
Yeah. It's certainly filled in. It was really the only thing that filled in the gap last year. Last year was hard. It was really hard. I have to tell you, it was really hard. And, but teaching the continuing education classes definitely did fill in the gap. Now, did it fill in the gap and make up for those contracts that I had? No, no. But it did fill in the gap and keep me busy and keep things going in my business. So yeah, I mean, but there was definitely a pivot that had to happen. It's been an interesting year, Jeremy. Interesting year.
Have there been any times in the past year where you've kind of thought, nah, this just isn't going to work, dust off the resume, go back into corporate?
Yep, there sure has. I've thought about it. But, it's funny. I've thought about it, but it's one of those things where, the determination to continue moving forward in my business has always been stronger than the need to feel secure, especially financially. Going back, if I were to go back and become an engineer again and pursue a corporate job, a salary job, it would be purely financial decision for me. And I thought about it because last year was hard for so many reasons. And I thought about it, but I knew that I had something special with my business. I knew that I loved what I did when I actually had the opportunity to do it, and that I had to stay the course no matter how hard it was going to be.
So what are things looking like now? I mean, who knows what's going on with the pandemic? As I say, it's May 2021. Things seem to be getting better in some parts of the world and not so much in other parts of the world. But where are you in your business as we speak?
I'm just trying to hold the line, I guess you would say. I'm just trying to hold the line. I'm still teaching my continuing education classes, which I love. I've turned them into something that I love. And so I definitely get a lot of fulfillment in teaching those classes. But then also I've started to reach back out to corporate, and things that are starting to return to, I won't say normal because I don't know what that word means anymore. Right. But that path or that availability in my business has also started to take off a bit again, working in corporate one-on-one or with corporate teams. And so things are starting to definitely look better, and that's a great thing. But the pandemic has certainly taught me how to always be ready to pivot in your business, because you never know what's ahead.
So going forward, assuming a return to whatever normality looks like, what do you hope your business is going to look like? Is it still going to be a mixture of the continuing education and leadership, or do you want to try and go all in on one or the other?
I think it's always going to be a mix for me. I thrive on challenge. And if I just purely focus in one area, I think I'm going to get bored, to be real honest with you. And so I would like to continue traveling down the path of teaching continuing education classes, because there's certainly a need. There is definitely a need. And I want to continue to fill that need. But also, I do plan to continue working in corporate, as a consultant, working with professionals one-on-one, but then also in teams and building those programs within corporate America too, because that's really important. It's something that I wish that I'd had when I was an engineer, practicing engineer, because I certainly didn't have anyone to go to to ask those questions of, those difficult questions about communication and dealing with people and dealing with clients. I didn't have anyone to go to. And so there's a need there. But I think I will always work on both sides, if you will, because I think that each side challenges me in a different way. And I think that just continues to make me better.
You mentioned that you'd read a ton of books when you were looking to start a business. Are there any one or two which stick out as were particularly helpful for you?
Yeah, so I have a ton of books that I read, but there's one, and I didn't actually read this book starting my business, but I read this book years and years and years ago when I was first in the engineering world, just trying to figure out how to better communicate with people, how to be a better leader, how to show up, as a professional and make a difference for myself and for others. And the name of the book is called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Again, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I've read this book about 3 or 4 times. There's probably highlights and turn pages and tabs all in that book. But of all books I ever read in my adulthood, that book is a cornerstone book for me because it gave me tips and tricks and just a viewpoint, if you will, into what it's like to be a human being, right? And the way that Dale puts the book together, it really helps you to understand how to communicate with people, how to show up as the most authentic you can, and how to just be a better friend, how to be a better colleague, and really, it also goes into your personal space, how to show up as a better mom, how to show up as a better spouse, how to show up as a better friend. And so that book itself is probably my number one book for anybody, for anything, because it just, no matter whether you're working for yourself as an entrepreneur or whether you're in corporate America or you're wherever you are, how to be a better person, and treat people better is fundamental, no matter where you are. And that's what that book is all about. And funny enough, it was written in the 30s. And so but the information and the guidance remains true. So yeah, that would be my book. Lots of other books to suggest too, but I think that one is most important.
It is a fantastic book. It's been a number of years since I read it, and I think I've only read it once, so I think I'm going to have to dust it off and reread it because I do remember it had just some eye-opening tips and suggestions. It's absolutely fantastic. Well, Erin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and telling your story. If people want to find you online or get hold of you, where's the best place they go?
Oh, sure. I have a website. It's eringallimore.com. And they could always send me an email. That's the best way to reach me anytime. And that's just Erin@eringallimore.com. So reach out anytime.
Brilliant. I'll put links to those in the show notes. Well, Erin, good luck as things return to some kind of normal. And thank you again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that interview with Erin Gallimore. One of the things I really appreciated about that conversation was that Erin just did not sugarcoat things. She was very honest about how friends and family hadn't initially been supportive of her idea to leave a well-paid, secure job and start a new business. She made it clear that it's a good assumption to assume that you're just not going to get paid in the first year that you operate. And as she said, the pandemic has made things really tough. But she has been able to pivot. And in doing so, I think she's laid the groundwork for a great future for her business going forward. I also liked her description of how she started to rationalise her thoughts when she was figuring out what she wanted to do and what it looked like. She asked herself, what do I want every day to look like? And that's a great question to ask. And if that's a question that you'd like to try and dig into a little bit deeper, then do go back and check out episode 77 with Samantha Morris, where that was exactly the question I asked her, and we spent some time trying to figure out what your perfect day looks like. And I will put a link to that episode in the show notes, which you'll find at changeworkllife.com/108. And as well as the link to that episode, I will put in the link to where you can get hold of Erin, and there's the full transcript and summary of everything we talked about. I hadn't realised as I was talking to Erin that this episode is actually scheduled to come out during the week of the second birthday of this podcast. It really does not seem that long ago that I was celebrating 1 year, and 2 years has come round so quickly. It's been an absolute thrill to interview guests like Erin and all my guests. But this is your podcast, I'm doing it for you, and I need to know what your ideas are. I need to know what help you need. So please do get in touch. You can go to changeworkllife.com/contact. That's changeworkllife.com/contact, and send me your ideas for future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, there's more great episodes coming up, so subscribe to the show if you haven't already, and I can't wait to see you next week. Cheers. Bye.